On this episode, we want you to get out and check on those alfalfa stands. Learn about what is happening to the crown and alternative options for forage if necessary. We discuss where farmers can save costs in the areas that are under their control. Hear how scientific studies provide assistance to farmers for being good stewards of the land. Remember, be safe out there and don't text and drive.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman from Mershman Seeds. Welcome to Cup of Joe, episode 24. Today we have all our regulars back. We got Tommy Johns, Turk Rigginator, and Ben Pieper. Well, we're going to start with Ben today because I think he's got some critical information on alfalfa.
Yep, this is the time of year where we're doing stand counts. We're out actually looking at what the alfalfa looks like. We've heard from multiple people. I have 3 or 4 fields I have to go visit this afternoon once I get back in the area. But we have some winter kill issues. So this winter was very hard on some of our wheat seed production fields, and it was also pretty hard on a lot of our existing alfalfa. Turk, you had the opportunity to talk to our alfalfa sales rep, and he says it's a Midwest problem, right?
Yeah, he said he's been in fields all the way from southern Illinois up into Wisconsin, and he said it's a common problem in all areas. This was a really tough winter on alfalfa in general, old stands, new stands, and new seedings especially, because he said things kind of froze up a little bit earlier than expected last fall on these new stands, and so that's an issue that has to be dealt with. Hard winter, a lot of freezing and thawing. He said he actually seen some crowns that were pushed out of the ground 2 inches, so that plant's not going to make the year for sure. So when you're evaluating your alfalfa, that's something that needs to be looked at.
A critical thing to understand on alfalfa too is it's a desert plant. You know, it came from the Iraq area. So how much water did we have this year? I mean, since last fall, I mean, we've had a lot of water. Obviously, that freezing is going to, that extra water in the soil is going to push those crowns right out of the ground.
The more moisture you have, and that more freezing you have, the more heaving you get. And then the ice cover that we had in many areas as well, even north to south, is an issue. But yeah, he said, get out and look at your stands.
Right. One of the key things that we have to remember is that even though that plant is a dormant plant, that plant still has to have oxygen. Mm-hmm. So where we're seeing it here locally, the problems where they're seeing the highest amount of kill is in the bottom of terraces or in anywhere along fence lines where the snow is real thick and it stayed for the entire season. That alfalfa plant didn't have the ability to breathe throughout that season. So it's just like getting a thick layer of ice over the top in a long period standing, you know, where you get water on top of ice and there's just no way of oxygen to get to that plant. So
yeah, we had a lot of ice this year. Think about all the falls that people had this year, so it affected the alfalfa too. So Ben, you've got a bad stand. You're out there looking at what should you do? Well,
there's a couple of different options, and that kind of depends on each individual's opportunity. If you're switching over and the ground is if you have the ability to grow corn or soybeans on it, corn is your first option because you want to use up the nitrogen credits that come from the alfalfa from a long period of alfalfa stand. I think there's probably close to 100 pounds of nitrogen, 120 pounds credit. I'd have to go back and look at those numbers exactly, but you could have some huge savings on nitrogen if you're going from alfalfa to corn. Second option is we have the option to sell, what would work really well, a key partner from alfalfa if you had to plant soybeans if the ground's less productive, it's not meant for corn. If you wanted to plant into soybeans, the Enlist soybeans would work really well. The Enlist Duo portion of the Enlist program is Roundup and glyphosate, commonly known as Roundup, and 2,4-D put together. That's probably the best alfalfa killer there is. Mm-hmm. I mean, when it comes to
you could use the Enlist standout, the Enlist One product, which is a choline version, and you could plant the same day.
Right. Roundup and 2,4-D together they work really well to terminate an alfalfa stand.
Yep.
So those are 2 different options there. If you have to have the forage, I'm going to have a list put together by one of the local small seed salesmen. If you have to have a forage out there, he's putting a list together for me. I actually talked to him last night to offer some of our local growers here different options if they have to have a forage. So
I know you
come in and
Sudan grasses and some of those Sudan sorghums, things like that would be an option too, because you do have the nitrogen in the soil from the alfalfa carryover there. So if you have to have forage, there's some other options, obviously.
Right.
So I expect prices to actually, because of the shortage of hay, I think that we're going to see some alfalfa prices move up.
Right.
So,
locally here, I mean, it's for grass hay, it's $6 a small square. So, I mean, it's alfalfa is even higher than that, a good alfalfa. So we're going to see a lot of alfalfa transition. I think we're going to have a lot of alfalfa get put in the ground this year.
The main thing is get out there and look at those stands right now and make the evaluation and start trying to figure out what the best plan is.
Yep, you want to do your counts, and you want to pull a plant out of the ground, cut it in half. If it's got a lot of fibrous tissues in the taproot, that's a sick plant. If it's got a real brown discoloration about an inch underneath the soil from basically your crown level all the way down through, if it's brown and soft almost, you know, that's a dying plant. So get out there, look at them, cut them in half, do some stand counts on the number of shoots that you have growing out, the number of plants that you have, because both of those are key components.
Now, because of autotoxicity, you can't go out there and add more alfalfa in that stand, because the young seedlings will actually not grow because of, well, the leaves put off a toxin that affects the growth of the new alfalfa seedlings. But you could, if you have a thin stand, you could go back out there with red clover or something like that just to limp it through this year. Of course, you're not going to get a lot of tonnage except for that first cutting on red clover. But I've seen that done over the years where guys said, hey, I've got to keep my stand, but you really need to rotate. So obviously you got to think about all those things. If you want to go back to alfalfa, you need to rotate to another crop.
Every situation for every farmer is going to be a little bit different, and just need, consult with somebody to help you figure out what the best option is.
Ben, for some of our listeners or our customers, explain to us how you would do a stand evaluation for them to go out in their field and what you'd want to see.
I can put a great attachment up on the video that goes through how we assess a stand. Essentially what you carry around is a 30 or 36 inch hula hoop, and we have a little paper graph that shows how many minimal plants that you have to have and how many shoots that those plants have to have, that individual plant has to have to make for a decent stand evaluation. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. It's been a year since
I think it's a good reminder to look at, and then might be something that
I know
benefit from.
In the whole alfalfa stand process, it's a losing game. In other words, you typically plant 50 to 60 seeds per square foot, hoping to get 30 of them to germinate, and then within 2 to 3 years you have 6 plants per square foot, maybe 5 plants per square foot. Mm-hmm. So I mean, if we sold soybeans that way, we wouldn't stay in business very long.
It's like Ben alluded to. It's the number of shoots you have coming off of those 6 plants that really makes
the critical aspect. Yep. And that's how you get the finer stems and the higher quality and all the other things that come into alfalfa production that are critical. I find alfalfa a fascinating crop. It's just a tremendous crop, and it's just kind of a lost art, because when I started in this industry, almost everybody had an alfalfa stand. Now it's very specialized.
Correct.
Well, Turk, what do you have for us today?
Not a lot of new stuff for me to talk about, Joe, but one thing that there was an article that come out on U.S. farm debt soars as crop inputs climb further. I just wanted to kind of allude to that a little bit. They actually talk about what in this article that the average expected price for soybeans in 2019 is going to be in the range of $835 to $885, and it's going to be tough to show a profit. So what can you do to help be more profitable? And one of the things that you can do with Mershman soybeans is to our treated soybeans is to cut that population back, Joe. You could cut, depends on what you're planting right now, but in 30-inch rows, 120 to 25,000 is all you need, and if you're in 15-inch rows, 130,000 is all you need. And I know a lot of farmers are planting a lot higher than that. There's a lot of 160, 180,000 plants per acre out there, but you don't need that many. And we love to sell soybeans, but we also want you to be profitable, and we want you to make money. And so that's the number one thing that I could, if you can cut your population back by 10% or 20%, you will not be disappointed in the yields by doing that.
I agree, Turk. I don't think folks realize that in the production of a new soybean variety, basically you make that cross with one flower, and you get hopefully 3 beans from that one flower, and that's the start of a new soybean variety. So you take those 3 beans and they start going through the testing process that we have in our breeding programs. And at some point, you decide to release that variety, and you may have only one bag of seed, So how do you get that one bag of seed to 100,000 bags of seed or more? Well, it's been done for decades. What we do is we plant that one bag of seed at approximately 18,000 seeds per acre, 6 pounds. Well, what do you think 6 pounds of soybeans planted per acre with excellent weed control, that's the key, because sunlight's never wasted, something's going to grow there. What do you think the average yield is year in, and been doing this for years and years, what do you think the average, what percent of normal will we yield? 75%. 75%. So that's at 18,000, 75%. So Turk, when you are advising farmers to say, hey, plant your soybeans at 120, 125, 130, somewhere in there, you have a huge safety factor built in as long as you have weed control.
We know you can maximize yields with 80,000. When we do replants and we talk about replants going out there, 70 to 80,000 will still give you 100% yield potential. The critical thing there is timing. When did you put that crop in? Because if you replant or anything else, obviously you're delaying planting. When you delay planting, you're costing yield. So all that kind of comes together. But we know you don't need that, and especially with the new enlist soybeans, where we know that we can have outstanding weed control. You save some money on seed.
Yep, I agree. And the other critical thing is to save costs is to subscribe to our weather forecast, John Felt, and try not to plant in front of those big, huge rain events.
We got some of those going on here. Minnesota and South Dakota and Nebraska all just got pounded, and now they're going to have ice coming behind it, and so all that's going to have a rapid melt and coming down that Missouri River again. So it's there's some continued issues out west for sure.
It's going to be a nightmare.
And then other areas are still going to be wet for the most part.
Yep.
John talked about that. We talked about a little bit last week about the Mid-South, down in that area is going to get hammered.
Yeah, we talked about the anhydrous issue, trying to get it on wet conditions. And I talked to my brother Henry, who runs is the president of Mershman Fertilizer, the fertilizer side of our business. And the Mississippi River, for example, is going to be all balled up for quite a while. In fact, maybe not be down to normal levels till after the end of May. So that's going to affect barge traffic, bringing up fertilizer and whatnot. So we could see some spot shortages out of some terminals. Now, Henry's a pretty good planner. I think he's going to be okay. But some of our competitors, we can't speak for them. But so this thing, it's just not good for a perfect start to our crop this year with the weather and all the logistics that go into putting a crop in. But there's one thing: the American farmer has never let us down yet. So I think we'll be okay. But it's going to add a little more stress, and that's financial stress is right now is we're definitely in the forefront of all farmers. Looking at their cash flows. So that boils back to our last episode. We're talking, hey, when you get to the end of your rope, don't give up. Tie a knot in it and hang on. So
one other comment that I might have is, talking about profitability and staying on the farm and being profitable. Don't overlook the new crop pricing opportunities. We're looking at December corn now and the 415 range in that area. And of course, that's Chicago Board of Trade. You got to take your basis off that. But I think in a lot of cases, that's going to be some break even for sure. So don't overlook that opportunity. I know it's really hard to even think about selling anything when you haven't even planted it yet. But all the meetings that we went to and we talked about the top farmers and the most successful farmers will have up to 50% of their crop sold prior to planting. Yep. So don't overlook those opportunities because many times they don't show up again.
415. 415. We can cash flow 415. We didn't when corn was $7. We didn't think we could cash flow 415. But 415 is a number that you can survive on.
Yeah.
350 isn't.
Right.
350 is
So it's out there right now. Don't overlook that opportunity. Now, the opportunity on soybeans is not that great, but we do have our federal crop guarantees fallback, which is I think 954 was the number on that. And so, in that whatever level of crop insurance you have is going to kind of give you a floor on that amount that you've offered to buy.
Yep. Be realistic and plan and execute that plan.
Yep.
I always tell farmers, hardest job you have is not growing the crop, it's marketing the crop.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Are we starting to see a little bit of a swing between, corn acres shifting to soybean acres?
In areas that cash flow is difficult, I am seeing less
Lower
corn
input.
acres. Yep, I'm seeing a lot more bean acres pop up. It's just the way it is.
It's started showing up more in the last, I would say, week, in the last few days. Actually, this last storm coming through has kind of shifted some people to that mindset.
Yeah.
Yep, there's two different things going on there. It's the when am I ever going to get my corn in the ground, and bean input is typically a little bit less, so
Yep.
it works better for cash flow for the areas that were really hurt last year.
Well, you always got to remember, it's not the weather at planting, it's the weather after you plant that determines yield.
Yeah.
So we still have a long way to go.
Right.
And not to mention, next week some of our first soybeans from winter production from South America are coming in. Some of our new Enlist E3 products and Liberty Link GT27. So we always say a little bit of a delay helps us catch up on our South American seed. So we got to find something positive in this situation.
Yep.
Tommy, what do you have for us today?
Well, there's some new quantitative data here from Missouri about dicamba. And I kind of wanted to talk to Turk and Joe about this, or Turk and Ben about this. And Ben, could you let me know, I know this talks about why soil pH matters when kind of playing with dicamba. Explain to me what they're talking about when that comes up.
What they're getting at is they're finding that the pH of the dicamba solution, once it meets or mixes with anything, and soil pH, soil pH is effective as well as what the tank mix of the dicamba is. What they're finding is that when you run into acidic style soils, it's affecting that dicamba no different than when you lower a pH of your tank mix. So the same thing, they don't want you to use AMS as a conditioner because it lowers the pH of your tank solution. Well, if you're spraying dicamba on a soil surface that's lower, that dicamba essentially adheres to the moisture has a low pH, it's going to gas off more. It's not going to stay where it belongs.
Okay.
Well, I read that article from the University
Yeah.
of Missouri, and it's a graduate student did a ton of work on just looking at dicamba in general. But I think it's something that is new evidence, and I know we could be easily labeled dicamba haters, but the reality of it is, my opinion is that we need every technology that we have out there to control and combat resistant weeds. But it's really important that farmers know exactly what the limitations of any product that they have. And I think our discussion today is focused on this new information that says when you have a low pH in your soil, that when you use dicamba as a burn down, you could still see some volatility. And not so much that you're going to affect the neighbor's soybean field, but you're going to affect those trees that are just starting to bud. And they seem to be, according to this article, seem to be extremely sensitive at that point. So that was a key point that was mentioned in there. And then I believe there was another key point about the inversions.
Yeah, temperature inversions are more common than what we thought they are. Especially at nighttime hours when dicamba or whatever the product is being applied there towards dusk, so to speak, and it's starting to. And you can brush on that if you wanted to a little bit, Ben.
Well, I just think that there hasn't been as many studies. Huge temperature inversions where you see the cloud wall and things like that. Those aren't as common, but there's constantly inversions. Anytime that you have a fog, anytime that you have anything that's going on, there's always an inversion, and that could be at 6 inches ground level, that could be at a foot ground level, that could be at 5 foot ground level, and it's something that we pay attention to now because we have to pay attention to it, and it happens way more when you mark it down on the calendar. Today's an inversion. Today's an inversion. It happens way more than what we originally thought it was.
That's why they don't want any spraying done at zero wind. They want a 3 mile an hour wind.
Well, inversions are caused correct me if I'm wrong, but it's when the soil temperature is warmer than the air temperature. Is that when an inversion can occur? Is that basically the start of the inversion?
The inversion is essentially when you have a warm air mass over the top of a cool air mass, and it creates a shelf.
Okay.
Essentially the same thing, kind of like a fog.
Yeah.
Right. So anytime you see brown fog, or you see wherever you see that smoke coming out of the smokestack, or in town or whatever, and you see any layer that just is consistent, that's an inversion.
Okay.
Wherever it is. So we just don't want them on the ground.
Well, and according to that article, they're saying that these dicamba formulations are gassing off for what, 72 hours?
Yep.
So that puts you through a lot longer window than that potentially could, you might be spraying in a perfect situation, and then inversion occurs, later, and you're still in the same boat.
Well, and they were definitely talking about the amount of dicamba in the air was just as bad as the time of application, and with the temperature inversion of 72 hours after application.
We'll put that link up
Yeah.
so that farmers can read the article for themselves and draw their own conclusions.
It's a really good article.
It is great.
But it's a really good information. Graduate student did a great job measuring this. Gives you a little more information so you can use and apply dicamba the right way. And
I think that's the critical thing, the right way. And I don't. Again, we're not dicamba haters here, but we've got to make sure it's just a black eye for the industry when we don't do it right. And so the more education we have and getting it done right is going to help everyone.
that's right, because it will affect the other technologies too, because the microscope goes on those too, and that includes the Enlist E3 and the LibertyLink GT27 technologies. We personally think they're better technologies, but that's up to the farmer to decide.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking about things in the industry that are not necessarily good for our industry, obviously, everybody's been following the lawsuits for the potential or alleged glyphosate Roundup causing cancer, and the first two didn't go well, and and they found in favor of the plaintiff, and this has had a tremendous effect on Bayer, who purchased Monsanto. And I read an article that they have a key stockholders meeting in Germany coming up on April 26th, and one of the major shareholders, Mr. Deca, is calling for some major changes within the company because they've lost a third of their investment because of all these lawsuits, and they really can't quantify it. And this is not good for their company and for the future of their company and for the future of our industry. So as a seed company, obviously we want to keep track of what's going on, which way the wind's blowing, because obviously if it's blowing towards the consumers, and most people in the United States, don't ask me why, but they take food for granted. I mean, they just assume that every time they go into a grocery store, it's going to be stocked to the hilt with fresh, high-quality food, and that's what they've never, ever had to worry about getting food. And the reality of it is farmers have to produce this product. They have to produce it in a way that's environmentally positive, and they have to do it right now at a below cost of what their operations is, and still try to maintain their operations. And so all of these things are coming into play in our industry, and whether you are a Monsanto hater or a Monsanto lover, the bottom line is it's not good for any of us in this industry. And so we need to pay close attention to this and see how it turns out. But obviously, executive management at the top at Bayer, it's got their heads on the chopping block, literally. I mean, so there could be big changes coming in that company, which will affect American agriculture.
Yep.
So that's things that are not positive, but things that we got to keep track of. Well, Tommy, I know I'd like you to close out today's discussion.
Yeah.
And I see you were texting. What are you doing?
I was kind of showing you while you're doing that there that it takes 4.6 seconds for me just to send that little text message. I know it didn't seem like very long, but that's enough. When you're driving at 55 miles an hour, that's enough to be driving blindfolded the length of a football field. And I want that to kind of hit home here is, there's a lot of farm implement and machinery out in the roadsides. We're getting planting season and all through the growing season. Be mindful of those slow-moving vehicles out there. Be mindful of these people pulling in hydrous tanks. Again, a text, you look down at your phone, it's taking your eyes off the road for 4.6 seconds. Wow. At 55 miles an hour, that's like driving blindfolded the length of a football field. If 360 feet.
Somebody covered your eyes while you were driving for 4.6 seconds, you'd have a heart attack probably.
I would probably be giving Joe a call because I wrecked his vehicle. That would not be good. So be mindful, be safe out there. Don't text and drive. I know it's a thing that you hear all the time, but it's the most important thing that you can do when you're driving. What they say, texting and driving, you were was 4 times.
I think it's 6 times. 6
times worse as driving
drunk,
intoxicated.
Yep.
So
that's pretty incredible statistic. Good tip, Tommy.
Be safe out there.
You bet. Well, thanks for watching today, and we appreciate your business, and we'll see you next week.